views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey everybody, it's nice to see you, and we're here for the Bronx Buzz. And what we do on this program is we talk to Bronx journalists, Bronx writers, sometimes photographers, and get a sense of what they're thinking about when they go out and cover the news in the borough of the Bronx. And this evening we are blessed with my old buddy Jarrett Murphy, who is the editor of City Limits. And so it's great to have Jarrett with us. Nice to talk to you, Jarrett. How are you?
I'm good, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
Always good to talk to you. Maybe the biggest political news hit the Bronx yesterday, the biggest that we've had in a long time, with the idea that there was a kind of agreement reached between the IDC, featuring the Bronx State Senator Jeff Klein, and the rest of the Democrats in the Senate. So I guess the play out is we won't have the IDC to kick around anymore. Your thoughts on what you heard yesterday from that rather large news?
Well, it's kind of extraordinary. I mean, you know that there was a deal reached in December to fold the IDC back into the Democratic caucus, the mainstream Democratic caucus. But that was going to have the IDC continue to exist. Jeff Klein was going to be a co-leader with Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who was leading the mainstream Democrats for several years. And that was predicated on the results from the April 24th, the pending April 24th special elections, one of which involves the George Latimer state Senate seat up in Westchester, which could tilt the balance of the House, or I should say of the Senate, the upper house. So that was the deal that was in place. So this was a surprise. It's being announced before the special election. It involved the IDC essentially dissolving and Klein becoming deputy leader, but uniting the conference around Andrea Stewart-Cousins. It's a pretty amazing event, and what's amazing in many people's eyes is the cynicism of it, that it occurs after passage of the budget, and that Andrew Cuomo, who for years has said he was powerless to force the IDC and regular Democrats to come back together, is now crediting himself for having had the power to force the IDC and the regular Democrats to come back together. So it was quite a big event yesterday.
I would add, I guess, another note of cynicism or political maneuvering. Senator Klein and, frankly, the other IDC members, or maybe former IDC members may be appropriate, are facing stiff challenges here in the Bronx. Alessandra Biaggi, the granddaughter of the late Mario Biaggi, is raising a challenge, and there have been Bronx political groups aligning behind her, largely because of this idea that Senator Klein has formed the IDC and has not been a so-called traditional Democrat. I wonder if this is his very clever way of cutting their legs off and kind of taking this issue out, and he'd say, well, we did that, but, you know, we're now not doing that, so it's, I guess, in his mind, maybe no longer an issue in the upcoming election.
Well, I think the challengers that the IDC members of the city are facing, and I think all of them except for Tony Avella, way out in Queens, were facing legitimate challengers, people who faced an uphill battle, but definitely going to give them a fight. I think that was probably part of the consideration, but frankly, I think Andrew Cuomo was worried about a narrative developing that Cynthia Nixon, his possible primary opponent, would push, that Cuomo has benefited from, maybe even fomented this division among the Democrats, that he failed to deliver his progressive promises because of it, and therefore she was going to make this a giant millstone to hang around his neck. I think some of the speculation is the reason for him moving quickly was to avoid any kind of narrative like that developing. So I think it's possible that the fates of Klein and others, their potential risk might have driven them to the table. But the big man in this deal, Andrew Cuomo, I think he was worried about his own political skin more than those of any individual IDC member.
You know, many people in the Bronx, and Jarrett, you've been around like I have been, To some degree, people are like, I don't care about all that stuff. All I care about is the meat and potatoes. How is the New York State Senate going to serve me? How am I going to get things passed, whether it be ethics reforms, whether it be the DREAM Act or other things that are important to me? So from your perspective, how does this new alignment or potential alignment, of course, we still have the April 24 elections to come, but how does that affect what the state Senate might be able to do moving forward from a practical point of view for the people of the Bronx that just want to know how I'm going to be represented?
Well, I mean, it's still very much up in the air. I mean, that George Latimer seat up in Westchester County, it's a close race. If the Republicans win that, then that changes the numbers. Even if Democrats do win that, they still would be at 31-31 because Cynthia Felder, who is an elected Democrat, didn't join the IDC, but has outright caucused Republicans. He is now, people have said, the most powerful man in the state because if he swings to the Democrats, it becomes 32-30. But even then, Gary, you're dependent for each vote on each issue on whether or not the likes of Cynthia Felder side with progressive Democratic values or not. So you can have a 32-30 majority. You can have a 33-29 majority. It's still dependent on a couple swing votes. So what I think a lot of progressives are saying, in fact, I believe even Governor Cuomo said it, is that if you really want to have an effective majority, one where one or two people can't be kicked off, it's got to be more than 32-30. And so the other races this fall throughout the state where it's possible to grab a Republican seat, there's Marty Golden, the longtime Republican senator from Brooklyn, facing a kind of two-fronted challenge from Democrats. There are other states in Long Island and Westchester and upstate that might be at risk. That's where I think some of the attention is going to shift.
So then this is what we're going to do. I accept your answer, and then we're going to take this, we're going to bracket it, and we're going to put it aside, and maybe the next time you're on the show will be after those elections, and I'll ask you the same question, and then we'll see how we're reformed. I think that's fair.
I think so. You can keep me accountable that way. I like it.
Right. And me too. I mean, what the heck? Listen, let's talk about something else, and we've had, of course, Abby Savage-Lew on this program a number of times, but she has just done an unbelievable job for you, and you get the credit because you aligned city limits to really look at these zonings and the rezonings and recognizing how important they are to the face of neighborhoods in the city. So just to recount what everybody knows, the Jerome Avenue rezoning was passed, and I'll give you a little of what we've done. On Bronx Talk, I had the two council members who were behind it, Councilmember Vanessa Gibson and Fernando Cabrera, and we talked with them, and they were rather glowing about what they had accomplished. And then a week later, we had two of the advocates who have been protesting and frankly were at City Hall protesting that very day of the vote. And they had a whole different point of view, saying that, we essentially didn't get what we wanted. This is really going to be a disaster for the Bronx. I guess the first question I have is about displacement. It seems to me, in my evaluation of it, if they got $1.5 million for businesses, mostly auto businesses, to help them relocate, you got, I don't know how many dozens of auto businesses in that area. That $1.5 million doesn't go very far. Somebody's going to get displaced. I don't see any other way of looking at it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's definitely a big concern. I mean, and also I think that, the relocation, money to relocate is one thing, but what makes that trip work for the auto industry is the presence of so many other auto firms. It creates a network effect. It basically means that if you have a repair need, you can drive down there, and each particular muffler shop or auto glass replacement shop is really just a commodity. And if one is crowded, you go to the next one. And so they all kind of benefit from the presence of other firms, just like Willits Point in Queens used to. So it's not just a matter of how much money it takes to physically relocate firms, and I believe you're right, the $1.5 million is not that much money, but whether they can recreate that kind of environment or something akin to it for all those guys who do work, which is, it's not pretty to look at. It's noisy. It can be smelly. I'm sure it's not always great to live by, but these are jobs that all the research indicates are, decent blue-collar jobs that people can maybe raise a family on in the city. And it's very, very difficult to recreate that elsewhere, kind of stick your hand into a marketplace and reshuffle it. And I think that, as much as the actual dollar figure, is a concern that I have, and I think some of the advocates do too.
I certainly agree, and you mentioned Willets Point, but to my mind there are two ready examples of exactly what you're saying, and I will start with the Bronx Terminal Market. There was I forget the dollar amount, but there were millions set aside to help some of the bodega distributors relocate. Some of them went out of when it came to the Bronx Terminal Market. Some of them went out of business. Some of them did well, but they said exactly the same thing. We like being together in a community of other bodega distributors and food distributors, and even if we relocate, it's not going to be the same thing. And let me just add, and I think if I remember correctly, you were right on top of this at Willets Point, that we had heard the Willets Point auto repair shops were going to relocate to a place in the Bronx, and then all of a sudden that place dried up, and frankly, I don't know what happened to them. I'm guessing many of them simply went out of business. So the track record on these things is not encouraging, let's put it that way.
I think that's true, and I think for the businesses and on the residential side, Gary, a lot of this depends on just how ferociously the market moves in there. If it takes its time, if the city has a chance to roll out its programs to protect what it wants to protect, then it might not have as big an effect. But if it takes off quickly, moves in more fast than the city is expecting, then I think both in terms of low-income tenants and businesses, you're going to see much more of that displacement impact that everyone is worried about.
The other thing, maybe on the positive side, so they got $189 million to pay for various infrastructures. They're talking about millions going into park infrastructure. They also, and Councilmember Cabrera was very quick to mention, it's really $289 because we got two schools at about $50 million each. That's not part of the $189 million. That's got to be a good thing for a community. You're going to bring in new people. You're going to improve the parks. You're going to add two schools. You see that as a victory? I know there's another way of looking at it, but I want to give them credit. They negotiated that. That's a good deal.
Yeah. I mean, Gibson and Cabrera, I think, did a fairly decent job of getting that kind of stuff out of deals, and they benefited from the fact that this was, the fourth, I think, rezoning to go through the process, and so, both the process of the council and the administration have evolved from East New York to Far Rockaway to East Harlem to Jerome Avenue in terms of understanding what they need to put on the table to get buy-in from the council members. And I think, Gibson was proud of having done that and was able to extract a decent set of goodies from the city. With the existential question a lot of people ask is, why did a neighborhood like Jerome Avenue have to go through a rezoning to get that kind of investment, to bring its parks up to code, up to stuff, when other neighborhoods obviously get that, sort of as a matter of course. And that's a real basic equity question. It's a good thing that it's coming now, better than it not coming. Obviously the skeptics will continue to say, at what price?
But, one thing I would contend, and I do want to follow up with a different point of view, because you have a unique perspective, frankly, that I don't have. But, and in fact, the advocates brought it up on Bronx Talk last week. Essentially the same argument. But, a lot of neighborhoods, and it doesn't matter what neighborhoods, they're talking about overcrowding in their schools, and they're not getting new schools. They're talking about funding for parks, and I know, Jarrett, you and I both know that fundings for parks, neighborhoods are not getting $60 million to renovate parks in their neighborhoods. Doesn't matter what neighborhood it is, whether it's Riverdale or the East Bronx or, somewhere else in the city. So I understand that argument. I understand the trade-off. Why do we have to trade off? But nobody's getting that kind of money right now, at least in my perspective.
That's fair. I think what I guess takes the place of it in some neighborhoods is an active and well-funded parks conservancy. That's what tips the balance and creates some of the disequity. Yeah. Definitely.
So what I do want to ask you before we run out of time, because you have the perspective, I do not follow the rezonings in Far Rockaway and in East New York and the other places. How did the Bronx do? Do you think that we paved the way for some new dialogue, or did this follow a pattern that the others followed as well?
Every neighborhood's different. This one had the auto industry to make it, but I don't know really how it. I think definitely the Bronx did better than it would have if it was the first rezoning, because I think the advocates sort of sharpened their tactics and they did have an impact. I know they're disappointed with the outcome, but they didn't have an impact on the outcome. So I think to that extent, it did fairly well. What I wonder is the infrastructure that was created on a social level, the coalition of unions and churches and community groups that grew up to kind of resist the rezoning. I wonder if they'll remain intact to sort of monitor it, pressure the city to deliver on its promises. That's probably the biggest question mark going forward in terms of the politics now.
Jarrett, that's a very savvy perspective. My knee-jerk reaction to your question is that I think they will stay together. I think this was a unifying event for good, for bad, or otherwise. Jarrett Murphy from the City Limits. For anybody who wants to catch up on the great work that you do, it's citylimits.org. And we always appreciate you and your time, and say hello to all my friends over there.
I will do so, Gary. Thank you.
All the best. All right. We're going to take a break, right? That's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. We go like this in the business. And then we'll be right back, and we're going to talk to Sarah Valenzuela from the Bronx Times. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Here we go, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and let's join one of the people who's becoming one of our favorite guests on the Bronx Buzz, Sarah Valenzuela from the Bronx Times. Nice to see you. Nice to have you with us, Sarah. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me again. Always a pleasure to be here.
I'm not going to say where you are or what you did, but we'll say that you're in traffic, and it's the magic of media nowadays that we can talk to you, and we want you to drive carefully. But nice to have you with us today. Let's talk about a couple of stories that you've written in the Bronx Times. I've had some dialogue with some local people in the neighborhood about the Vapor Lounge, and I've heard kind of mixed things, that some people are saying, you know, these guys who own the Vapor Lounge on East Tremont Avenue are trying their best, and they've had kind of some bad luck. and they're trying to do the right thing, and they're ready to recondition and reformat the place to work. On the other hand, the community board is like, that's it, we've had enough, there have been incidents. What's your read on what has gone on there, and what the status is of what some people say is a popular place and other people say it's got to go?
Absolutely. I've also heard both sides of that argument, the side where people say, no, it's got to go, and the other side where people say, no, give them another chance. I definitely understand both sides because, there's nothing worse than investing so much into a business. If you are a business owner, there's nothing worse than investing into a business and then having it fall flat. I don't think that's good for anyone. But I've personally never been to Vapor Lounge, so whether it was whether I can say it was a favorite of my own, I really can't speak to. I know that I spoke with some community members who say that if they've personally never gotten there because they were too afraid to go there because of all the incidents that happened. There have also been people I've spoken to who have said that it was one of their go-to places, even with the rowdy-ish crowds. But as far as Vapor Lounge goes, I think they are, at least from what I was told, they are headed in the right direction. They've made some extreme moves, or maybe not so extreme, but they've made some really big moves in terms of improving their security thus far. I was also told that they're closing earlier than normal.
Right.
To sort of filter out certain crowds that come in later, and I discourage, I guess, a lot of drinking if that was part of the reasoning for that. And I know the owners are also brainstorming different things to do with the property if they have to, if they end up having to give up their liquor license and change from the lounge that they are. So I know that they've been, well, at least I've been told that they've been brainstorming different things to do.
So I'll give you.
I think that,
well, I'm going to give you a little perspective. We've been through this, and we've been through it very recently. For example, at Seafood City on City Island, and there was a horrible incident there. And of course, everybody, the community board and the City Island Civic Association, they were all up in arms. But right now, things have calmed down because there was a sense of relationship between management. The community kind of calmed down about it, and I'm not. Nothing is absolute. I know some people are going, Gary, how could you say such a thing? But you don't get the sense of that same kind of discord. What I read in your article, in your well-written and well-reported article, was maybe some talk about reforming it as a jazz club, which would be fantastic and change the tenor. And the things that you just pointed out, if they improve security, close a little earlier, try and change the tone. I would like to think that we can, as you said perfectly, if you've opened a new business, you've invested in the Bronx, well, let's really work together to give you a chance. And again, not minimizing any seriousness of what people are concerned about, but I'm hoping they can nail this down, and I think there is precedence for making that happen.
Absolutely. I hope the community, no one really wants anyone to fail in the community, so just here's to hoping that it all works out for the best.
There you go, and thank you for your reporting, because I would not have known about all this stuff if it weren't for you and our buddies at the Bronx Times. Speaking of the Bronx Times and what you have written, there's a project coming to the Allerton Avenue on Boston Road in Thwaites Place, and this goes on everywhere in the Bronx because there's no parking in the Bronx, period. We know there's no parking in the Bronx. You put up a new building, and right away people say, you know what? Now we're really not going to have spaces. What's your sense about what is going to happen with this new building at the corner of White Plains Road, Boston Road, and Thwaites Place?
As far as everything that I've heard, and I've still kept up with a lot of my sources to see what happens with it, the community board and the Councilman Richie Torres, I know both of those offices are working pretty hard in terms of trying to figure out is adding this apartment worth the trouble, because they're not going to be adding parking for their own building. The premise behind this apartment building was it's supposed to be affordable housing. which is good. I mean, no one's going to say no to affordable housing because the housing situation is a citywide problem. So
Right.
I can definitely understand that. It's just there's this notion that even if you have an apartment building next to a train and it's supposed to be affordable housing, that people won't own cars. And I just don't understand the correlation between. I mean, of course we want to believe that people who'd be moving in there would not have cars or would not have a lot of cars, but I feel like you'd be lying to yourself if you say that, okay,
Yep.
they live close to a train, they're not going to have cars. At 2018, someone's going to have a car.
Yeah, I have to
Especially-
agree with you. I agree with you totally. And what bothers me, just for gab's sake, for chat's sake, is it making an assumption about people with lower incomes. What, they're not allowed to own a car? I mean, and much like, so they have to be subject to only being able to use the train. Maybe they go to work by train, but maybe they work in another part of the Bronx and they can't take a train, or it takes them an hour to take the number 12 bus across the Bronx. I mean, and I'll add one more thing, is that the law, as I understand it, says you need 30% of the apartments you're giving, you need that many parking spaces, but that's bypassed because of the nature of this housing. And so I understand it. We got about 30 seconds left. How do you think this is going to play, or what's going to happen here? Do you have a sense?
As far as the apartment building goes, right now it's all still just on paper. Everyone's office is looking into it, and right now they've still been meeting with the developers to see their other projects, see what they're doing. So for right now, it's all just on paper, so who knows? It can go either way.
Sarah, you are the best, and we hope next time you'll come on in here and you'll get yourself out of traffic, and we'll be able to have you here in person. Take care. Say hello to all my buddies over there at the Bronx Times.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me again.
Okay, great. And guess what? They're wrapping it up, and we're saying good night. We'll see you next time on the Bronx Buzz. 2 weeks of political debates coming up on Bronx Talk. That's the 9th and the 16th. And so we'll take care of you, as we always do here at BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision. Good night.
Dumped by a tennis ball. My ex-owner drove me out to the woods, yelled fetch, and by the time I brought the ball back, he was gone. Yeah, I was pissed. But the folks at the shelter helped me let go of my anger. I learned coping skills, like taking it to the hole. Boom! Now I'm ready to fetch again. But how about I throw and you run and get it?
We are there, day one, with baby names and a gift that lasts a lifetime. We are there as you grow, protecting you and those you love. And we are there as you start your next chapter. We are with you through life's journey. We are Social Security, securing today and tomorrow. Get to know us at socialsecurity.gov.
This video produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.